So, you've heard WoW's newest expansion is coming out this year, and you're wondering if you should return. Even though WoW will be barely legal by the end of 2022, it's actually turning 18 years old this year. This boomer of a game is about to have its best expansion in years. Before we get into the list, please be sure to hit the like button for the YouTube algorithm and let me know in the comments why you are or aren't coming back for Dragonflight. Don't forget to subscribe for more WoW content. Before we get into the video, I want to thank this video's sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. I'm just kidding. There's no sponsor for this video. I'm just messing with you guys. All right, so reason number one is that professions are getting a massive overhaul, the biggest one that we've seen in the history of this game. It's no secret that professions have been on life support for the better part of a decade. Blizzard always has some reason for players to engage with professions beyond just the standard consumables for PvE content. In Shadowlands, it was legendaries. In BFA, it was, well, there was no reason to do professions in BFA. But in Dragonflight, they're going to be making professions a much bigger part of the game. From deeper customizations to snazzy new icons, which is my favorite part, honestly, to professions gear, I can do a whole video on why I love the direction that professions are going in Dragonflight. And once I do, I'll put a card in the upper right-hand corner. Number two, the return of talent trees. You guys knew this was coming, right? Blizzard has already released a handful of these talent trees, and from the ones that we've seen, they look really, really great. I can't wait to see what kind of wheelchair the Ret Paladins are going to get in Dragonflight. No, but seriously, talent trees have been sorely missed, and they provide a level of customization that we haven't gotten since they were removed back in, I think, Cataclysm. Borrowed power systems have attempted to fill this void, but they always feel disconnected from the player. While the talent trees are obviously going to be filled with mandatory talents that are kind of no-brainers, they don't really feel like choices, just the fact that you get a point every level to feel like you're customizing your character, that you feel like you're molding your character into what you want it to be, is going to make leveling a lot more engaging, especially for new players. One of the things that I think people forget about this is that WoW's not going anywhere for a while, and Blizzard has to really make the game in such a way that new players are going to want to play the game, and they're going to want to actually pay that sub price and stuff like that. Again, I can do a whole video on why this talent system is really, really great, and I probably will, and when I do, I'll put a card in the upper right-hand corner so you can take a look at that. All right, so reason number three, no more borrowed power systems. Technically, there is going to be borrowed power in Dragonflight, unfortunately, but that comes in the form of our class tier sets, and I think that no one's going to argue that we should be doing class tier sets, so I think we're going to have to give them a little bit of a free pass on that. Things like Azerite armor, Legion artifacts, and obviously Covenants and Shadowlands are the problem that we're trying to solve here. These are too short-lived, and they always are just the centerpiece of the expansion. So rather than focusing on character power and improving the customization of your own characters and your own classes and improving the game that way, they put in these systems that end up being just this huge chunk of player power. If you look at a pie chart of where player power should be, I think we can all agree that something like 80% of your player power should come from your buttons that you press that are associated with your class, and not some Covenant borrowed power system, stuff like that. And I would even put in tier sets into that system. We don't want that to be such a big piece of where your power is coming from. In BFA, this was at its worst possible place yet, where proc-based, even just passive procs and things like that were drawing so much power to them, and they were such a big deal that, you know, hitting max level, you were doing almost no damage, and then after picking up a few pieces of gear, your damage would triple 10x almost by the time you got fully geared, which is insane. And most of that power was not coming from your classes, the buttons that you were pressing, your class abilities and things like that. In early Shadowlands, Ret Paladins could one-shot with their Kyrian Covenant ability. And while that was really fun to do and entertaining, it left a really kind of a bad taste in your mouth because you knew that it wasn't going to last. You knew that this wasn't something that really came from your own character, from leveling up or anything like that. It literally was just because we selected the right covenant, right? The other really big drawback from borrowed power is that borrowed power takes away from content, basically, because that is the content of the expansion, right? When you look at Shadowlands, this whole thing was sold as covenants and choice and all of these kind of things and the stories of each covenant, and that could have been good, but the reality and the execution of that was that it took a huge amount of time from the developers as far as balancing those things and making sure that, you know, they had to make all these different animations, you know, and all those different things that they had to do as far as the covenants and the conduits and the soulbinds and the abilities and the class-specific abilities, and there's all these different pieces to it that create this web that almost becomes impossible for them to to balance. And now, without having those things in the game, you can imagine that Blizzard, we're assuming, right, that Blizzard is going to use those resources instead to create better content, more high quality content, better balance in the talent trees, more focus on the professions, and spending more time on the things that we really care about, and that's the raids, the mythic dungeons, and the PvP. And reason number 4 is that you really don't have a lot of choices when it comes to really good MMOs. You're either playing boomer MMOs like RuneScape or WoW, or maybe even an even boomery, is that a word, boomery? An even boomery MMO like Star Wars Galaxies. Or you're playing newer MMOs like Lost Ark or Genshin Impact, something like that. But WoW's biggest competition right now is obviously Final Fantasy XIV. And while we don't have specific numbers on either game as far as how many players are playing or how much time they're playing, however you want to kind of gauge which one is the bigger game or the better game, we can all kind of agree that they're both great games, and it is kind of another option that you have. However, you're talking about 2 games. You have the option of 2 different games to play when it comes to MMOs, and that really wasn't the case a few years ago. And beyond that, if you don't like Final Fantasy XIV, whether it's for aesthetic reasons, kind of like the anime waifu kind of stuff, or if it's just because of the long GCD or whatever, or maybe you just don't really like the game, the aesthetics of the game, that kind of high fantasy kind of game. But my point is, if you don't like Final Fantasy XIV for whatever reason, you're kind of stuck with WoW. So that's another good reason to come back to the game, just because it's still the best out there. And the reality is, guys, that it is one of the few surviving MMOs that have made it through to 2022 is because it's such a high quality game. If you made it this far into the video, I really appreciate your support. Please be sure to hodge that like button, subscribe for more WoW content. Take care. See you in the next video.